This episode of the Museum J.E.D.I show is brought to you by Monadnock Media. Monadnock is a media design and production company that collaborates with museums to create media experiences that explore and celebrate racial equity and social justice. To learn more, visit monadnock.org. If you would like to individually give to the Museum J.E.D.I show, please send your support to either one of the following mobile payment services: CashApp, $, capital T, lowercase h-e, capital M, lowercase u-s-e-u-m, capital J, capital E, capital D, capital I. Spells out the Museum J.E.D.I. Also, you can give on PayPal through paypal.me /capital T, lowercase h, lowercase e, capital M, lowercase u, lowercase s, e, u, and m, and then capital JEDI. PayPal.me /Museum J.E.D.I. All right, welcome to the Museum J.E.D.I show. J.E.D.I for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. The show meets at the intersections of social justice and museums. Today, we're going to talk to two dynamic museum leaders who've centered their work in social justice while leading institutions on STEM and history and art and culture. Two amazing individuals, starting with Dr. Tonya Matthews. Dr. Matthews is the president and CEO of the International African American Museum, which is poised to open in 2022 in Charleston, South Carolina. She's an experienced executive, a thought leader, and educator, has a proven track record in organizational leadership, strategic planning, diversity and inclusion, program development, and project management, vast visitor and community engagement initiatives. She's also the founder of the STEMinista Project, a groundbreaking national initiative that inspires middle school girls to consider tools and careers in STEM. In the past, she's held many different leadership positions: Associate Provost of Inclusive Workforce Development for Wayne State University in Detroit, Director of Inclusion for the American Alliance of Museums, President and CEO of the Michigan Science Center, and Vice President of Museums for Cincinnati Museum Center. My favorite part, she's a published poet. You know, I have a weak spot for poets. And she's appeared alongside poetic and musical legends like Tony Medina, Nikki Giovanni, Roy Ayers, and the late, great Charles. Welcome to the show, Dr. Matthews.
Thank you, Brother Omar. Good to be here.
Awesome. I'm going to introduce the next one, which is Dr. Robert Bert Davis. Dr. Davis brings an extensive background in nonprofit museum management, education, and fundraising. Most recently, he is a principal of the nonprofit strategic consulting firm, DRMD Strategies. He is now the president and CEO of the America's Black Holocaust Museum. He was a former president and CEO to two Iowa organizations. I was going to say, I always say this word wrong. Dubuque. Thank you. Dubuque County Historical Society and the National Mississippi River Museums and Aquarium. He is the former president and CEO of the Zoological Society of Milwaukee. During his tenure there, he secured a $6.7 million donation, the largest foundational gift the society had received to date. Bert and I are on AAAM Board of Directors. Tonya and I were connected through the AAM Facing Change program while she was Director of Inclusion there. And Tonya and Bert together at one point were both on the board of directors for AAM. So we're family.
Definitely.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show, Bert and Tonya. Listen, what I want to get into as we talk about the intersections of social justice and museums is I would like for you all, Tonya, please go first. In your own words, define social justice.
Oh, all right. Yes, let's start with the easy questions. So I think, you know, it's interesting. Most folks sort of center around the word justice. I think I center around the word social because all of this is about people. and people have different perspectives, of course, but we also have different personal narratives. And I think that that is something that is often considered irrelevant, right? As if what you're bringing to the table, as if what you've experienced, what you've been taught, what you've been socialized to think about yourself or others doesn't make a difference. But the truth of the matter is, when we expect, say, juries or judges or even policemen and women to be the implementers of justice, without that social aspect, without acknowledging that who they are has a whole lot to do with how they execute justice, and who we are has a whole lot to do with how we receive justice. I think those are very big things. But I think probably what's also really critical is the fact that you're asking or bringing up social justice means that previously there was injustice. Social justice is not a preemptive maneuver. It's a reparative maneuver. And I find that a lot of times we're trying to get into these conversations without acknowledging the injustice that has been done that requires social justice to be executed.
I'm glad we're recording. That was beautiful. Dr. Bert, what's on your mind about social justice?
So I also, along with my dear sister in the struggle, Tonya, want to break these two words down, even though they are used comparatively. So socialization. So when we get to the fabric of who we are, tradition comes into play, but socialization actually molds us, right? And so when you, Tonya, were talking about how judges and legislators and policemen and women don't enforce laws, but interpret laws, take the laws into their own hands, they're also looking at you through a socialization prism, whereby their perceptions of you, people who look like you, people who talk like you, have been skewed. So it's not like you're just a human being. I'm going to arrest you, or I'm going to ask you for your ID because you were driving erratically. You were speeding. You have a tail light out. If there was justice, we would be socialized in a way in which they would ask you to step out of a car, whether you were black, white, red or brown, or whatever. But because we've had this long-standing tradition, and it's beyond the history of the United States. It's since we've been on this planet, we have been socialized to create this pyramid where only a few are sit at the top, and they live on the backs of those who gradate down to the very foundation. And they get treated consequently different as they move up or as they move down along that socialization structure. And so for our museum, we are really steeped in two things. Our mission, which you may have been going to, but I'm going to put it out there now. Our mission is to create this awareness of what are the deficiencies, what are the disparities, what are the realities that we face right now on November 22nd in 2021 that were created during colonialism, slavery, and Jim Crow. And how is that manifested to this very? Most people don't even understand the connection. Most people don't want to revisit the connection. And I'm sure we'll talk about critical race theory. But the other part is our vision is, okay, we are where we are. We're not going to hold people hostage for what their ancestors did. Although we will remind them they didn't participate, but they benefited, and they continue to benefit from what happened in our history. And that is poignant. And I don't want them to feel bad for themselves. They just need to realize it. But my final statement is we really want to create safe spaces so that we can talk about racial injustice, social justice, civil rights, voting disparities, fair housing. I mean, all of these things are relevant. If we were to ask our collective parents, these were the issues they were struggling with in the 50s and the 60s. And we're still dealing with them now. So we want to create safe spaces whereby we can have these conversations. and everybody leaves better off than when they walk.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, looks like we.
Yes.
So in that case, do you guys see social justice different than DEAI? Or are they connected? Or is DEAI something that you do on the way to social justice? What do you guys think about that?
You know, I think for me, it's like anything else, like continuous improvement, right? Remember when it was all about multiculturalism, right? And then we had to jump up to diversity. We thought that was going to fix everything. It was like, oh, y'all put all these people in the room and you still don't let us talk. Okay, now we got to add in some inclusion. Okay, now we included, but you at the top of the table, I'm at the bottom, here come equity. And so I think what it is that the farther we get into this space, the more we realize the limits of the language that we use to create it, right? So we got the diversity, we got the equity, the inclusion, working on the accessibility, and then we got to yet another, so what, right? So what do we do with this? And so, for example, part of the way that may have come, which is sort of this idea that inclusion requires a hand up to folks that you are including. That kind of philosophy doesn't take into account the previous injustices, right? It's more than equity, right? And so when you're talking about social justice, it's not just how do you include voices, it's what do you need to do such that those voices are equitably included. And that's going to require a little justice, I think, which is a little more conscious, deliberate uses of it. So when I feel like, being funny, I just say, because every time we come up with something, they figure out a way around it. So we come up with a new term to stick on top.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You're right. They they moved the goalposts every single time.
White supremacy is malleable. It's a shift changer.
That's why Black folks are poets. So like, listen, we got language. You move the post, we ready. We got this.
What do you think? What do you think about it, Bert?
So once again, I will. I'll go back to the traditions of culture. So let me go back to something that I want to say before, and that is culture trumps strategy every day. Everything, right? So you could be literally talking to one of your friends that's of a different ethnicity and know about the do or say is wrong, but you have been culturally inculcated to that behavior and thought pattern that it just comes out. And then you're like, oh, but I got Black friends. I really, you're my Black friend. So I get back to, if in fact social justice was based on the premise of human rights and human justice, that we all are living beings, then these things would kind of play themselves out. We wouldn't have to necessarily have DEAI if everybody was treated as a human being. And if everybody was treated based on Trump strategy. Culture does truly trump strategy. So you have people who culturally have been trained and inculcated a certain way. It's been family traditions, but they have friends that are of different nationalities and ethnicities, but they can't break the behaviors that they have been steeped in, that have been steeped in.
Yeah.
And so if we're able to create traditions around, we may be different in our practices, but our destinations are all the same. And I think that's one of our biggest problems is people think that they can manage other people's behavior. You can't. You can supervise people's behavior, but you can't manage them. You need to give people the wherewithal to say, if Omar and Tonya and I are going to a restaurant, I drive, Tonya takes an Uber, Omar, who's young and in shape, rides his bike, and we all get there at 6:30 when we're supposed to. Who gives a damn how we got there? But our problem is we have mastered the ability to want to control people's behavior and pattern their behaviors to our own satisfaction. I think there would be less of a need, finally, for DEAI or JEDI or any of these things if people were just treated as people and treated based on their capabilities. We don't do that. And right now in America now, so let me just preface this because I know we might get to it. I'm in Wisconsin where the guy just went to Kenosha with a loaded assault rifle. He was underage. His mother drove him across state lines with an assault rifle, and he shot 3 people and killed 2. And he was able to claim self-defense. We all know if that had been a brown or black person, they might have killed him on the spot or her. Now, here's the other complexity to this. A primarily white suburb outside of Milwaukee called Waukesha had their Christmas Day parade yesterday, and a car full of young Black people plowed through the crowd and killed almost 20 kids. It's horrible.
Wow.
But, and I hate to say this, but I know it's true. I'm not driving anywhere in near Waukesha after dark, probably ever again, as long as I live in Wisconsin. Because I just don't trust the system.
Yeah.
I just don't. And so if we were able to just treat everybody as human beings, some of these other things would never have been created, and more of them would be dissipated, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I definitely resonate with that point, and I think part of this is acknowledging that this is real. I mean, you know, several months ago, of course, we had the gas shortage, and folks were freaking out all over the Southeast. We don't know if they're gonna have gas, and the pumps are running out of gas, and that kind of thing. And I was in transit, and I actually needed to head back down to South Carolina. I had come up to the DC area to visit my family. I literally delayed my trip back down to South Carolina because I knew where I was going to need gas. And with tensions that high and folks that worried, there was not a chance. There was not a chance that I would have felt safe pulling off into one of these gas stations in the Deep South and needing gas, just because I understood. I understood the level of entitlement. I understood the fact that I am an acceptable target for one's anger when you're sort of feeling sort of upset in that space. And I think acknowledging that is indeed my reality and the reality of many people who look like I do. But then B, take it to the next step, which is, if that's your reality, how do you then react to stuff like that, right? That's the level of stress you are under every day, right? It means that every day you're walking around at 99, right? And so not taking that into account. So when you get into these conversations about the quote unquote angry Black woman, I just had a conversation with a sister of mine, and she was in a meeting, and one of the things she said, I didn't like the fact that I was in there and had to be so loud and so forceful in my comments that I felt like the angry Black woman. Right. But she said it as if there was no justification for her to be angry. Right. So you've got all of these overlaying things in terms of that. And it's this myth, right, of angry Black folks, as if some folks don't have a really good reason to be angry, and folks should be impressed that at least took us till 4 o'clock in the afternoon to get there. Sort of in these kinds of things. And so I think that those are some really interesting things that we have to deal with when we're thinking, as Bert was saying, about people as individuals. And I think that we are out of time with pretending that we don't know, right? I think we're out of. You may not be able to deal with the fact, you know, that Black people, Black women, Black men, whatever, have a reason to be angry. You may not have any tools for this. But we are beyond the point where we can pretend that there is not justification for that anger. And I think that if we could just make that little bitty step, just that little bitty step of acknowledgement, I think that's actually required for meaningful conversation to even begin.
Absolutely. I mean, your time is up. Enough is enough. It's a solid point, and it really starts to make me think a little bit more about what I'm about to ask you all, because you all have been leading through these struggles for the better part of your careers, if not all of your careers. And what I'm really interested to know is, as leaders who have led organizations across various disciplines represented under STEM and humanities, arts, culture, history, which way you want to call it, could you share a little bit about your thoughts about, are there similarities and differences in doing this work in a science center as opposed to an African American museum, or a zoo as opposed to a Holocaust museum? Could you guys talk a little bit about that? Tonya, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in Bert's answer to this question, because we have been on sort of a similar journey kind of in switching that. And right now, the way that I shorthand that, my background is actually as an engineer, started off in a science center, then History Museum, Children's Museum, Natural History, back to Science Center, and now I'm in a history museum. But what I like to shorthand it as, the two scariest words in the English language are racism and algebra. I happen to do both. Okay. So that's kind of, but think about it, right? They're both things that folks like, whoa, I don't know. We don't want to bring that up. And well, I wasn't trained for that. And I don't know how I can do that. And wow, you're amazing because you can do, it's literally the same conversation, right? For both of those words. That's why Dr. Bert's over there dying. It's the same conversation for both of those words. And what I have found is that some of the skills that I use to navigate in those spaces are also the same, right? This eternal belief that no, you can handle this. Trust me. I'm gonna lead you by the hand. You can handle this. There's some training, there's some learning, there's some experience, there's some immersion. Also understanding how people react when they are in fear. Right? Fear is recognizable, but the way it manifests is different person to person to person, right? So understanding that fearful people are irrational people, right? And so I think also understanding those kinds of things. And to Bert's point, there's been some significant socialization around both of these subjects, right? This whole STEM mathing is for those people. Right? It's not for everybody. Not everybody can handle it. Same with racism. Racism is about those people, right? It's not me. It's not you. It's not her. Like, that's not really my thing. Like, I'm just a person. I'm not a part of that. And so a lot of the language around it is similar. And a lot of the techniques are similar. But it's interesting. The one difference that I find is that attacking sort of this justice and racism and equity thing in chunks seems to be a little easier. So right now, for example, the STEM community, STEM world is quite vocal about needing to make changes in equity and race and gender and sort of all these kind of things, because they're like, we're going to put it in this little box, our box, and it seems chunkable, right? When you try to figure out how a young white man gets away with killing 3 people, right? When you try to figure out how essentially a Black man is put on trial because a white police officer was standing on his neck, when you're trying to sort of figure out those kinds of things, it becomes too big, too scary. And I find that people back away and they talk about what is actually happening and what's actually going on less. So that would be sort of the one difference that I see, that inside of a particular conversation or field, that the chunkable nature seems to have a better shot of people talking about the real deal.
Wow. Now, I like that a lot. I mean, it just makes sense for us we always think about this work sort of in a parochial, monolithic way, and to be able to chunk it out and phase it in seems as it's a lot more doable. You can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel when you think about it that way. What do you think about it, Bert?
So I want to go back to what Dr. Tonya said about racism and algebra. For me, it was racism and geometry. I don't know what it was about geometry. Algebra wasn't so bad. Calculus was not bad. Like, I took calculus and organic chemistry at the same time, and I was like, I'm kind of getting this. But for me, it was geometry. I don't know what it is. But to get back to the question, my reality has been similar to hers, but a little bit different post George Floyd. So the first part of your question was, you guys come from distinctly different backgrounds from what you're doing right now. So as a trained veterinarian, shameless plug, Tuskegee University, HBCU, my life has been lions and tigers and bears, Omar, right? So the only complaints I got from people at the zoo where I've worked for over 30 zoos that I've worked for over 30 years was, my hot dog is cold. How come there's no cotton candy? The popcorn is stale. The elephants won't come out. Like those kind of basic things. They were like really very basic. It was like, how come the big cats aren't out? Well, it's 105 degrees. They're inside where it's cool.
They want to know why y'all out here right now.
Right.
But we're not taking them out, right? Now I'm in a situation where, and this has really, really struck me in a way because of COVID, where I've had to actually sit here on my couch by myself in my little apartment and really process it. So I went from lions and tigers and bears, oh my, where everybody, except for PETA and In Defense of Animals, love zoos. They love conservation. They get the fact that animals primarily are the prism of which we view all nature. It's through animals, right? It's not through trees, it's through animals. And there's been significant research to verify that. So, you know, tons of people love zoos and aquariums. I now come into a scenario where the founder of our museum, Dr. Cameron, James Cameron, one of the only known people to survive a public lynching in the entire United States. And then to go on and write a book about it and found a museum around it. This work is hard as hell. So let me give you an example. So before COVID, the group that wanted to have the 100th celebration of the Tulsa massacre, they wanted the museum to be a part of it. And we were virtually, but we were actually going to host some panel discussions at the museum and actually travel to Tulsa to do the same thing. So the person who was pitching it to us, there was me and my small staff and my predecessor, and we're looking at some of these graphic images that have none of us have ever seen in any books, right? Because this is from the archives of the libraries and the History Center there in Tulsa. So he makes his spiel and everybody's like, yes, we want to be a part of this. Then he goes and he leaves. So I'm in my office, which is next to the conference room. Everybody goes to their part of the museum. No joke. 16, 17 minutes later, we all come into the common space and we're all crying. We are all trying to process how that could possibly happen in the United States. Not only did they slaughter these people just because they were prosperous, but the United States actually dropped bombs on Tulsa. This is some of the hardest work I've ever done in my life. But now people tell me who've known me all my life say that they've never seen me more committed to anything I've done in my life. Now, I will push back a little bit on people not wanting to talk about stuff because my experience has been here that because of George Floyd, I've had random white folks come up to me. My neighbor, she's not random, but my neighbor, people live in my building, people at the grocery store. You're the black guy at the museum, right? That's you, right? Yeah. What can I do? Right. I don't understand. So it was this wave around people of color in Milwaukee who we have this African American Leadership Council. And the sentiment went from, how do they not know? How do they not blanking know? To, oh, hell no. They make it seem like we're the problems and we started racism. So we ain't telling them a damn thing. To, wait a minute, okay, let's cooler heads prevail. We know some of these people that y'all talking about. You've been in their houses, they've been in yours. I've gotten checks from them, so have you. They aren't bad people. They just don't know. And so what I said to one of my consultants, and I'll never forget this, we were talking about this. I said, invariably, one of the problems with America is because of the way Black people have been represented in the media and in all of the major outlets and major methodologies of us showing people's cultures. Y'all know this much about us, and we know everything about y'all. And the only thing about this is, did you know about us, is sports and entertainment. And the other part is that we were former slaves. That's all y'all know about us. We know everything about you, from the Brady Bunch to Bonanza to Archie Bunker. We could just go through the whole litany of television shows that depicted white America. You now have to go back into the 70s and then the 80s, and you could see these undulations of how they represented us in mainstream media. So what we've seen is we've created and had over 5 book clubs around subject matter, around that books written about Blacks or by Blacks. And 65, almost 70% of the people who participated were white people that skewed demographically over 55. So they want to know. They're asking, how do we help? So we finally kind of called people down and was like, so we're going to create a list of books that they need to read. We're going to create a list of places that they need to volunteer. We're going to list some folks at J.E.D.I to write a check to, and movies and stuff that they need to be brought up on so that they can actually be aware of what has happened in our Black communities for 400 plus years. So it's, when you talk about a drastic change, like I said, man, life in a zoo and aquarium was a piece of cake. This work right here, like LL Cool J said, it is hard as hell.
Yeah. And I think, Bert, you are so right, I think, about that. And so we are in this space, space of why we got to explain everything, why we have to have these conversations, anybody who's ever been othered. And then I ask, well, do you want people figure it out on their own? Did you, like these are the options. We can definitely back out of this conversation.
Right.
But, you'll give folks a book, send them into a room and talk amongst themselves. I don't think that's going to go well for any of us. And so I think part of where I am now is, I'll always do the work. I'm not afraid of the work, but I would say, I have my eyebrow raises a little bit higher these days as I watch us not get credit for bearing that burden, as we get to be the advisor, but not the authority on these questions. This is usually what I have to help folks through. You're going to ask me, what can I do, and help me understand, et cetera, and you want to hear my thoughts. But you're still not quite ready to allow me to be the authority in this story. And I get it, to Bert's original point, that's about socialization. You're just not socialized to see the authority, sort of in me, even though is my story, sort of in those kinds of things. And I think that part of this has been around our excitement around the renewed conversation of allyship without really defining it. And without really explaining to folks, this is a journey and it's really hard. And it's actually counter to everything you've been socialized to do. You think because you see it, great, I'm going to be an ally. I know how to do this. It's really hard. Allies step back, right? Allies are back up. They're back up. And often if you're being called to be an ally, it's because you haven't been socialized to be the backup, right? And so now the folks who are on the front line sort of need you in that space. And so I have a lot of patience, I think, for those conversations. But I also noticed that while I was, in university, we had sort of finally gotten into the space where we understand that if you are, say, a Black faculty or Black staff member at one of these white universities, there's your job. And then there are the 24 other Black students that have figured out that you will talk to them and are in your office every other day, right? So taking up all this other time, you like advisor to the advisor to the advisor, right? And so universities are thinking about ways to take into account that level of work and give folks credit for it. It works very much the same on the outside, right? So Black folks who smile, right, have a really nice personality, look like they're engaging, like you can come up and ask the question. If I had a dime for every time someone said, you know what, I've never been brave enough to ask this question before. But let me ask you, right? If I had a dime, okay, my museum would be fully endowed right now, fully endowed, okay? But I know that I have that energy, right? I have that openness, and I'm there, to be in that space, and I'm always willing and happy to be in that space. But again, eyebrow raising just a little bit. Because we're not giving credit in that space, and we're also not understanding the psychic energy that it takes to be in that space, to keep the face straight, just to keep the face straight, because okay, listen, honey, what you just said, I'm gonna explain to you what you said, and it's gonna be okay. You can't ever say that.
You can't ever say that again.
You can't ever say that. You can't ever say that again. I'm telling you, not everybody's gonna take it the way I am right now. So I think so. So part of me, that's kind of the phase that I'm in right now. Can a sister get a little credit?
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep doing the work, but can I get a little credit for the work these days?
Let's give me some credit.
No, you gotta give them some credit. And then I love the piece about allyship. And I know sometimes we split hairs in terms of allyship versus accomplice and these types of things. But at the end of the day, for me, the big difference is who's willing to be accountable. Like who's willing to be accountable? Because stepping back and having somebody's back may be okay, but if you're willing to step in front of me, right, to take some of that pain that I'm feeling, that's a little bit more my speed of accomplice or ally. It's someone who's willing to step in. I've seen people before where I've heard so many stories, and I've seen it with my own eyes, where people are just completely quiet and complicit while somebody's getting berated, and that's not okay. Like, that's not okay. I expect you to step in and speak up for me in that case. But when when it happens, and then everybody leaves the room and it's just me and you want to give me a hug or say it's okay, like it's kind of too late. Like, I don't need it now. Like, I need you to step up.
Fake.
I need you to. We got to stand in the gap. We got to stand in the gap. There's dissonance here, and I need you to help me bridge that dissonance by being selfless, right? And I don't think it's asking for too much based on all that we've been through.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I'm with both of y'all on that. And part of what I have to do sometimes is also step back and realize, we are probably a lot more courageous. Those of us who are born into the fight, for lack of a better phrase, are just a lot more courageous instinctively than our peers have had to be, right? And I think that's also kind of part of it. And sometimes, I try to give friends, colleagues, whatever, who didn't have whatever it took to step up in that space, because I realized, okay, I do this one way or another every day. Microaggression is as real as a struggle. Okay, so this is, so it's a Tuesday for me, but for them, it's their first great adventure in should I step forward, right? And so trying to figure out kind of what those tools and what those techniques are for folks. And also, I think it's some folks' first engagement with potential harm, right? That there could be some pushback on this, right? Once you really do identify yourself as an ally, there is a bit of the weight that comes in your direction as well. Right. There are often repercussions, for that. And I think, some folks' first encounter for that is fear. And so I wonder, and I struggle with how to help folks through that. But part of that, little nod to the socialization, because you're that mentality is about, I got to step up and defend. No, you about to step up and partner. This is about to be a tag team thing. You're not going to be out there by yourself. That's the whole point of you stepping up. It's going to be like one of those ninja movies. We got like the back to back. You swing left, I swing right. We all just saw Shang-Chi. We know how this works. Okay. But I think that that's also part of it. It's just layers of mentality and layers of socialization when you're trying to get in this space. And you really have to interrogate your inner voice like several times over every time you step into one of those moments.
I love that you said that, because it reminds me about, I said about people stepping in front of me, but I don't want people stepping in front of me to be paternalistic.
Yeah, I don't think that worked for you, Omar. I feel like
no. We got to be in locked arm. We got to be in partnership and true allyship, and building these coalitions so we can move forward. And it just reminds me, we have all these things, in common through the work that we've done through professional associations like AAAM and AAM. But, another thing that we have in common is that we all three wrote chapters in this beautiful book called The Inclusive Museum Leader. And so I would like for you all to kind of remind yourselves about what you wrote about, because I know you've done a million things since then. But the first question I want to talk about is to Tonya about your chapter on practical ambition, positioning inclusive board member ethic as basic board duty, which is a great title, very thoughtful title. What I want you to hone in on specifically is you start to march through in that chapter a contrast between inclusive board member versus included board member. Can you just expand on that thought a touch, and especially in light of what we spoke about already?
So part of what I was trying to get at is that, as boards or any group is on this journey. So inclusive is about the deliberate art and action of welcome, right? Inclusion is a verb. I know it's not, but it's a verb, okay? Inclusion sort of needs to be a verb. So the inclusive board member is the one that's engaged in deliberate, conscious, self-evaluative practice about how to welcome, how to be inclusive, when to step up in defense, when to step back, and sort of all of those kinds of things. So talking about the skill set required there. Included board member was a bit of the conversation we were just having, which is full-fledged acknowledgement of the weight of what you have done when you have just decided to include somebody. What it's like to be the one, the only, the first, the other, Lord, it's a lot, right? It's a lot of work in terms of that. So part of that is recognizing the burden of that. And what that means to that person sort of in that space. This is when you get into your justice practice, your equity practice. And then what I didn't quite get a chance to go into, because that wasn't necessarily the time or the place, which is there's a particular skill set to being an included, right? There's a way you have to figure out what brand, what personality, what approach you're going to bring to the room. And I think that the way we've talked about that previously has been in a read the room, right? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. You're not going to wear your club clothes to church on Sunday, right? So we have all these kind of metaphors about how to recognize the space that you're in and act right. But really, for me, I've learned that being the included board member is more about understanding my own particular genius and then figuring out how I'm going to wield it in that room, right? That they're just certain elements of you that are always going to be powerful, practical, and useful. And it's about how you sort of use those inside of the room, all of the other trappings notwithstanding.
No, that's great. And I wanted, Bert, for you to chime in, because obviously you've worked with boards as a president and CEO. And what are your thoughts about what Tonya just shared?
So she's spot on about inclusive and included. And some of the research that I've done around, and she coined it perfectly, the skill set, right? It is a skill set. Now, some people have personalities to kind of fake the funk, right? We know those people, But at some point, you will be able to call them to the carpet and be like, not so much. But if you recognize that you have a certain skill set that you've either developed or you've been blessed with, finding out and figuring out when you utilize that in the board presence makes you included, to the point that you will know that your value proposition to that board, to that institution, to individuals around an institution would be based not on your interactions during the meeting, but more importantly, the interactions after the meeting or before the meeting, where they're checking in with you and say, well, you know what, I got this report, can you take a look at it? Or, okay, I got something to present, what are your thoughts? That lets me know that people actually value my thoughts on this, my experience on this. And so I think that is, she's spot on when she says that actually is a more valuable proposition, especially for people of color and for women. Now, we all are in this DEI space, and being inclusive is very, very important, but all of the other acronyms are important too. But there's actually more power in being included, because there is now this desire and need to have you there. Not just to have you there sitting there, but participating. Your opinions and your work is the culmination of your value proposition. So I think she's 100% right on. It's great to have the practice of inclusion, but it is better as an individual to be included to a point where you are necessary to the success of that organization.
Yeah, that really reminds me in terms of like my personal growth journey. And I think all three of us have been on it, right? Because, in the beginning, we the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed Black folk. We the smart ones. We the ones you get to put on a brochure. So that exception to the rule, right? I definitely felt that, as a kid, because that's also part of how we were raised and socialized. You're going to grow up, you're going to do well, you're going to be good for your people. You're going to set an example. You're going to get out there, people are going to see you, and the world's going to change just because you're doing what you're supposed to do, right? So you do that, and you get into those rooms and you get into those clubs, and they even make you like chair or president or whatever. And then you wake up one day and you realize that you've been made the exception to the rule, that me being a good, upstanding, whatever it is I am, has not changed the mentality about everyone else who looks like me. It's, oh, well, that's just Tonya. Right. She's different. Woof. Right. And so
don't get me started on that. Don't get me started on that.
It would make me I got to this point where I was so angry about that. I was like, but no. And
you're different. You're different. You're different.
You're different. Well,
and it's like they pacify you. You're different.
But not like you. But no. I know you. But I have grown in that and realized that the only difference between the exception to the rule and a seat at the table is my mentality. Right. And that's where I started to grow. I started to understand that, yep, I am the exception to the rule. That means y'all made the mistake of letting me in the room. All right. Here we are. So the seat at the table. And so I started to understand the responsibility of being the exception to the rule. It meant that I did get into the room and that I had a seat at the table, and me just being there wasn't going to change anything. But to Bert's point, me figuring out how to use my voice, interject my voice, sort of steer some things, is where I've is where I have come, over the past sort of growth period and season that I was in. And I think I got that actually from when Mae Jameson. I was in that space when Mae Jameson actually came to the American Alliance of Museums conference, and she had made the comment, what's the point of having a seat at the table if you're not going to do anything with it? Oh, fair point. And so it's just when Bert was talking, that very much reminded me of sort of me having to shift my mindset around that. And, pro tip, this is why Black folks don't like it when you say, but I have Black friends. Because it reminds us of this exception to the rule thing. You haven't made those friends like every Black person that you see. They're in your exception category. And that's why you and I are having a problem right now. So just
Right.
a little pro tip, little secret, insider
Right,
pro tip
exactly,
right there.
exactly.
Underline that one, folks. Underline that one. That's a good one. Bert, your chapter was titled A Call to Action. They gave you cleanup duties. You wrote the last chapter of the book. Putting
So
inclusion to work.
when they told me I had the last chapter, I was like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? They were like, dude, that is the best thing. You get the last chapter. I was like, oh, okay, hold on, okay. So my chapter really was about preparation for leadership. Especially because of a crisis. So I really focused on the leadership capabilities that I ascribe to, that I have read and kind of pattern my career on as it relates to understanding some different principles, of which, for example, I already enumerated. There's a very, very strict definition between management and supervision. And we always interchange those words. And what we invariably do to our staffs is we put them in a box that never really allows or supports them to actually grow, to even, well, not only grow, but even do their jobs effectively, because we think that they're supposed to do their jobs the way we would do our jobs or do that job, which is this, it's really, someone used this word with me last night. I was like, are you even old enough to know what this word is? It's totally poppycock, right? And so I really focused on some things that I've learned in my journey to be this inclusive leader. And that is understanding that everybody has a value proposition and that most of us don't ever take the time to figure it out. It's really, most of us as leaders are about building and making widgets. Now, the widgets can be programs, the widgets can be projects, but that's all we're really involved in. And one of the things that I know has become very much in really leaders who really pay attention to the fact that right now, because of the pandemic, we have a lot of people who have jobs who are, how can I be nice?
Don't be nice, be plain. Don't be kind, be plain. Come on, Bert.
Business having those jobs. They are ill prepared. They have no business having these jobs. But because the pandemic has shifted the whole workplace operationally, people are just taking anybody in. So you can go anywhere in the service industry, wherever you go, and you'll be like, literally 2 minutes into your conversation with somebody going, how in the HE hockey stick did you get this job? And so people are going to realize that because of this deficit, that they're going to have to really pay strict attention to how their leadership is going to have and percolate down so that it then reverberates and percolates up on productivity, because a lot of these people are just ill prepared. The other approach that I had was, because of this crisis, African-American museums in our leadership has really been shown some of our weaknesses. And many of our weaknesses have to do with fundraising. And so we've all been a part, well, Tonya, not due to a larger degree, but Omar and I were part of this AAAM across the United States in 4 different quadrants, hosting these seminars about leadership, fundraising, and just making it through. And so leadership is going to have to be something that is really, really a part of how AAAM, for example, is actually going to create its own identity. And so I think that you guys were interviewed by this group that they're advising Vedette on creating this fundraising platform over the next 5 to 10 years. And one of the things that I had them kind of rearrange the priorities is that creating effective leaders, especially in African-American museums, is going to be paramount for our ultimate success across the board. Because if the leadership is not prepared, leaders are literally looked upon for guidance. And as leaders, we're supposed to say, that is the promised land. But then the leader turns around and finds the people that he knows that can help him or her get to the promised land. But the distinction is, I got the vision, but I can't do it without you. And that's going to have to be something where whatever grants that we have, whatever funding that we get, that is really going to be, that we need to pull off, and you were talking about chunks before, chunks of money and funds to really do some very deep dive training with our future leaders in African-American museums, because we are going to be hit hard. Because the one thing that we know is America is showing Black folks love right now, but at some point that well is going to dry up. And we better be prepared when that well dries up, because it is going to be rather soon, because that's just the way it is. And people that have gotten these, we've all gotten grants that we didn't have to ask for it. There's somebody that's called and said, hey, look, you guys are Black, we're trying to help you out. Unsolicited. Those calls are not going to be coming all the time. And so we better have strong leaders who understand every aspect of how to run these organizations successfully. And fundraising is really the tool, because as one of my board members in Chicago said at the Lincoln Park Zoo, all roads lead to money. And any of the most unbelievably astounding projects and programs you could come up with, if you don't have any dinero, you have no programo. And that's just the truth. So that's really what my focus was just kind of trying to give some tenets for what I think are successful for leaders. And the last thing I'll leave you with is successful leaders always listen. One of the biggest things that we don't do, and I always used to say this when I used to teach, was biologically, if you're already thinking of the answer to my question while I'm still asking the question, then you're not listening to me. And so I think that one of the things that we don't do, and this is within our race and across races and across the ethnicities, is we don't sit down and take the time to listen. And all of these tragedies that have happened, these mass shootings of these kids, I'll never forget. I can't tell you what films or what music Marilyn Manson has been a part of, but some kind of way on 60 Minutes, he was, right after the Columbine massacre, he was asked his opinion. And he said one of the most profound things I've ever heard in my 61 years. He said, clearly the problem was nobody was listening to these kids. Because if somebody was listening, they may have kind of talked through their frustration, but clearly nobody cared. Nobody listened, so they had no other alternative but to shoot up the school. And that has happened time after time, from riots to all kinds of dissent. People are fed up because they don't feel that they're being listened to. So one of the most productive characteristics of an inclusive leader is listening.
I love it. I mean, what did Dr. King taught us? Uprisings of the language of the unheard, and it's a painful lesson that we keep on learning over and over again. And it kind of takes me back to another comment you made earlier, Bert, about having this conversation again in 10 years. And this is why I was leaning in with you all around the question between creating some distinction between DEAI and social justice. Because for me, if we can get to social justice as a framework that doesn't have barriers or has a new equitable space for us to really live in, then I feel like we won't have to have this conversation again. That's one of my goals. I don't want my children to have this conversation again. My oldest is already having this conversation with me as a freshman at Virginia Commonwealth. She's already digging into these types of things. Even before she left for school, she was digging into it. I'm just like, man, like, I think I was having these same questions when I was your age. And so we need a better social justice framework so that, like, we can remove these barriers so we don't have to have the exact same conversation again 15, 20 years from now?
Yeah, I think it's framework and skill set. I think for you, I like your barometer. I think my barometer will be that the next time an other shows up, we don't have to have a whole new set of laws. I'm like, how come every time a brand new other shows up, we got to act like that other? No, we didn't mean those others. We just meant these others. I don't understand. Right. And that's, for me, that's how I can tell that we put whatever it was we were talking in a box. If we got to have a new rule, a new line, a new add-on to the sentence, if we got to add a comma, right? If we got to add a comma to whatever sentence said, this is who we're looking for, this is who we're taking care of, this is who has the right to do whatever, then that is how I sort of judge. All right, we had a moment, maybe it was a good moment, but we compartmentalized it and we didn't actually translate the skills to sort of go forth. So my barometer is one day an other is going to come up and it's not going to require a new law to treat that other, with their full level of humanity and empowerment and all that other kind of stuff. So that's what I'm waiting for. That's why
you're the poet. That's why you're the poet.
So Tonya and I worked on DivCom, so did you for AAM, but I was also the chair of the diversity committee for all zoos and aquariums. And our vision was that at one point we didn't need to have it. We didn't need to have the diversity committee. That's our vision. That it's no need, it's not necessary to have anymore, right? And so I think one of the final things I know we're drawing near that I think we need to also circle back to is the systemic nature of why we're in the situations we're in now in America, where people who are in leadership and in power ingratiate themselves in the blatant lie that these systems don't occur, right? So when you ask a politician, is the United States racist? And they say no, you're like, well, he's an idiot or she's an idiot. But the question actually is there pervasive racism as a practice in the United States? Now, if they say no to that, then you know they are really a fool. And so I think one of the things that's going to help us get to this system where we really believe social justice can kind of bubble to the top is really having these concrete conversations, realizations, and then destruction of the systemic barriers that have been in place for 400 or 500 different plus years. And until we don't, first of all, recognize them and then deal with them, we will just be spinning. We'll have this conversation 10 years from now. Your kids are going to have this conversation 25 years from now, because the core of the problem is the system that manifests this situation. Not the people. The people just participate in the system.
Right.
They're trained and they're the culture. But until we embrace what the systems are and then say this system has been created to redline folks so that they can't live in certain parts, they can't vote in certain parts. Like Texas Southern, I think it's Texas Southern, like they redistrict that's historic Black college, where on one side of the street, they were from one voting district. On the other side of the street, on campus, they had to go to another voting district, which was miles away. Whereas they could vote, the kids on this side could just walk from their dorm to the voting site. That's purposeful. That's systemic. That's meant to diminish the vote. And until we recognize these things, which are rearing their ugly heads now, we're going to be having these conversations again and again and again.
It's true. So true. So true. I mean, just hearing you guys talk reminds me of the importance of acknowledging the heaviness of what we do, acknowledging the self-care that we need to exercise regularly. But also what's really important is the coalition that we have. We're colleagues, right? You guys, particularly, you've been colleagues for years. And I think it shows that when we have these support systems, we're able to survive and thrive in this oppressive state. Like, it's really hard for us to do that. And I just wanted to acknowledge that before I ask this last question. This last question is, we know for a fact that Black museums matter. We know that there's a long legacy of Black museums being grassroots and community driven. Now, with the rise of Black museums that are national and or international in the scope of like what the two museums that you guys run, how do you see these new wave of Black museums, these new institutions continuing a community-centered focus?
So I'm going to answer that question from two perspectives. This is a podcast, you know, for certain folks, and so on the one hand, you know, if I'm thinking about, you know, me and my people and the culture, right, that there is a continual awareness and pressure of being an authentic, institutionalized structure. Right? When you decide to be a big old national museum with all of these big dollars and big monies and it looks great, but it's, you know, that phrase power corrupts, and it corrupts sort of absolutely. There's a lot of pressure around being deliberate and being authentic. So your question about how do we be the community center? How do we be community engaged? If we are the biggest, second biggest, third biggest kid on the block, what do we literally owe to our younger, smaller, less well-resourced brothers and sisters? You know, what does that mean? I mean, obviously the money and the dollars are coming from all of these spaces. How do I keep my feet on both sides of the street? You know, in that conversation, I'm not talking out both sides of my neck. I'm talking 360 degrees simultaneously all day, every day. It's like a big old circle. And so one, I think that, you know, when you are bigger and institutionalized and national, you must be more deliberate about your authenticity, right? And so I think in terms of thinking through that, and then I think on the other side is, okay, we built this museum for what? Okay, there is something about the conversation that has to change, right? We are this big, we are quote unquote this powerful, we're doing all this, we got this many visitors, we got this much money, all that kind of stuff. If the conversation does not change in some kind of way, we have failed. Right? If we do not help to do a little tweaking here on the socialization, a little bit here on the mentality, you know, if folks aren't treated a little better or have some conversation, whatever our key performance indicator is going to be, but at this scale, we are called to move the dial in some way. Right. And so that's the other half. Ooh, that's a lot of pressure. That's the other half of that, which is, we were just saying, if we're having the same conversation in 10 years, sure, there's some big picture things that I can blame, but I will also be forced to ask, well, what has the museum done? Well, what is the point if this conversation is exactly the same? And so I think that's the other side of that pressure when you are at one of these larger culturally specific museums that has this platform and this opportunity.
Absolutely. What do you think about it, Bert?
So, as always, Dr. Tonya has been great and pointed in certain specific words. So the key word for me is authenticity, that she repeated. So we have to be authentic, and being authentic is being purposeful. And so being very, very outright, and this is our purpose. This is why we are here, right? But you mentioned the community part. So I think there are two parts to that. One is the community has to be involved at every various level. So here's a quick story about what just recently happened here in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. So the Milwaukee Public Museum, Dr. Ellen Sinsky, who's the CEO, got the first installation of the International Nelson Mandela exhibit here to Milwaukee. Milwaukee was the first city that got it. It's traveling all around the United States now. It's in Portland. It's then heading out east. And it's going to be zigzagging the United States for the next 2 to 3 years. We got it first. I tell this story like this. It was a bright sunny afternoon and my phone rang and Dr. Ellen called me and said, Bert, we are going to be having the opportunity to bring the International Nelson Mandela exhibit. It's sanctioned by the family, blah, blah, blah. I said, stop. You had me at Mandela. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's a coloring book. I don't care what it is. You had me at Mandela. And so what I said to her was, I got a staff of 3. We're not open. There's only so much we could do. But what she said to me, which was so humble, she said, we're one of the largest and oldest museums in the Midwest, and we're a bunch of white folks. And this is probably the most important single person installation the museum has ever had since its existence in the 1870s.
Wow.
And we don't want to blow this. We need you because we're a bunch of white folks. I was so taken by that. So this is going to get into my second part. But because of that, we were able to create this community advisory council made up of all people of all ethnicities and abilities. And I mean, everybody was at the table. Asian, Hmong, Latino, Arabic, Black, white, old, young, some people that have disabilities. And some of these, and let me tell y'all, some of these Black women, they were putting up with no BS. They was like, so are you doing this? And are you doing this? And if you ain't doing this, you better not do this. And I just told Ellen, I said, Ellen, I want to accept this, but I need you to understand that you are not going to be the big white institution that comes into the Black community like you always have done, got what you wanted from us, and then went your merry way. That's not me. That's not how I roll. And you know that. She says, I know. I said, so this is now the second part of what I'm saying. The community is involved. They have to be involved. So in order for all of the museums, not just the big ones, but all museums have to recognize that if they are going to be relevant to the people who visit them, they've got to include them in some way in the programming and the operations. Now, there's so much that you know that they're going to say that you have to just look at them, give them a little side eye. But most people just want to be heard.
That's right.
And if you do utilize that, then you want to report back to them. So what we did was we created this community council. We educated thousands of kids, even while we were in COVID. We got international publicity around it. And then we called all the community leaders back and we did a full-scale report out on everything that they were involved in, to the kid, to the program, to how many people came, the dignitaries that came. The other part that we've got to do as larger institutions that still would bring along these smaller community base is partner. Partnership is going to be essential, I'm going to say quintessential, to our survival as Black museums. And so not only knowing and having great leadership and raising funds and having the financial wherewithal and operational wherewithal, it's incumbent upon us to work with these smaller grassroots organizations because we can help them in ways that they can't help themselves. So listening to the community at all levels is my first take. The second is partnerships are going to be the way that we're going to be able to survive and flourish, because granting organizations are looking for us to say the power of the three of our organizations working together versus one of us bringing you a proposal is stupendous. You can't walk away from this. And so partnerships is going to be the way in which, or collaboration is going to be the way of the future for us.
Thanks again for tuning into the show. The great Dr. Cornel West said, social justice is what love looks like in public. In light of this quote, and as we continue to consider museums as sites for social action and places of inclusion and belonging, our first question as museum folks should be, where's the love? And more specifically, where's the love that will allow us to see the humanity in one another? Until next time.